start this talk by putting in context the importance of adherence to lifestyle behaviors. And particularly, as you've heard, I study diet and exercise behavior and the adherence to those conditions. So in this slide, you've probably seen this one before, we see all-cause mortality rates reducing with moderate and vigorous physical activity. So you can see with a very low amount of moderate and vigorous physical activity, we see a sizable reduction in all-cause mortality. And then, of course, as you do more physical activity, you see rates of chronic disease reduce. So I'm particularly interested in the yellow dot, which represents diabetes risk reduction. And we can see that about 150 minutes of physical activity reduces the risk of onset of type 2 diabetes by about 40%. So this is, impressive, and of course I care about that, but also all other chronic diseases and how we can stave off these by prevention. But I think sometimes when we see these beautiful statistics and these beautiful graphs, we can forget that it's not the 150 minutes per week this 1 week. This isn't a snapshot. The all-cause mortality reduction isn't based on 1 week. It's based on engaging in that amount of physical activity each and every week. And so with respect to the chronic condition of type 2 diabetes, we know that people who have prediabetes, this clinically diagnostic condition that we can estimate how many people will develop type 2 from there, if they just knew what to do, right, we could prevent this chronic disease. Unfortunately, the majority of individuals with prediabetes don't actually know they have it. And so 30% of those individuals will go on to develop type 2 diabetes in just 5 years, and of course, up to 60% will develop type 2 in 10 years. So it gets on worse and worse. And we know, of course, just like all chronic conditions, that prevention really is the key. So when you think about prevention, these are big numbers. Almost 80% of cases of type 2 diabetes can be prevented by adopting a healthy lifestyle. But we don't, right? And so a little audience participation, just because it's dark in here and it's postprandial exercise time. Could you please raise your right arm if you're so able to do so? Okay, so most people can raise their right arm. Okay, great. Left hand? Yep, awesome, okay. And are you able to stand? Perfect. Okay. Have a seat if you so choose, or feel free to stay standing. Could you please give me a hands up, double hands up actually, so like roller coaster style, if somebody in your household or your home has attempted to change their physical activity behavior in the past year, but has failed in that attempt. Double hands up, or stand up, or double bonus points if you do both. Okay, good. So statistically, I'd say that was about 68%. That's great. All right, double hands up or stand or both if somebody in your household or home has attempted to change their diet in the last year but has failed. Okay, so I'd say at least half. Excellent. Anyone personally attempted to change their exercise or diet behavior in the last year but have not quite made it? Okay, there's 30 honest people in here. It's amazing. So you, and based on statistics, your families and those who you live with are the educated ones. Right? You know the information, you know that education. It's not that we're not clear on whether physical activity is good enough for us. That graph has been around for a while. Numerous other graphs have been around showing us the reduction in morbidity and mortality with physical activity, but yet we're still not able to do it. And we have these constant failures, not just in journals, but in our own homes. So why is that? So double hands up if you can see the screen and the numbers. Excellent. I actually have just garbage put up there and pretending that I'm like highlighting something really important. I know, I'm just kidding. All right, so what is up there in the red rectangle is just some statement that says the knowledge of health and exercise behavior. And what is beside it right here actually is a number, and it's 0.00, meaning that there is no association, zero association with the knowledge of one's health, the knowledge of exercise and one's future exercise behavior. This has been replicated a number of times, not with always the 0.00 there, and that's not a p-value, that's actually a correlation, lack thereof, correlative value. So we know knowledge isn't enough, but we still do this pushing exercise. So when we're trying to change somebody's behavior, we often, what's called, should them. So you really should do this. My dad has prediabetes. You really need to exercise more, right? Because I don't want him to die. And I don't want him to go down the course of my grandfather, who had double leg amputation. So the more we care about somebody, and the more that we're trying to help, the greater the tendency is for us to should them into behavior change. The sad reality is that that technique never works. So what I want you to take away from my brief talk is some real tangible takeaways of what does work, and I hope to provide you with some examples of how to apply those techniques, those evidence-based strategies or techniques, through some of my research on diabetes prevention. So I'm going to talk about some effective behavior change techniques. I'm going to talk to you about some techniques we can use based on motivational interviewing literature. And as I do those top two objectives or goals, I'm going to show you some mHealth technologies that, if used appropriately, can be evidence-based. All right, so jumping right in. So there's been a number of systematic and meta-analytic reviews on BCTs or behavior change techniques. So we're really starting to boil down in the science of health behavior change those key irreducible components. And then once we have those irreducible components, we can then assess which one of those components or which ones of these will elicit changes. So on your left, I have dietary behavior, and on your right, physical activity behavior. And what these two of the most, I was going to say popular, but I don't want you to think of it as like pop science here, but these systematic meta-analyses by Mickey and colleagues and Bull and colleagues have demonstrated that the technique of self-monitoring is actually really effective. And some would argue that out of all trials that have been done in this area, self-monitoring is the mainstay across multiple trials. So how do we self-monitor? I'm going to use this really simplistic diagram I created from control theory, from Carver and Shear, 1980s, to really show you how simple it is to self-monitor. So we all start with a goal, and we compare our behavior with that goal. So this comparison between what we're actually doing and the goal we set for ourselves is how we self-monitor. So from here, it can break down a bit, or it can go really well. So if it goes really well, we set a goal of exercising 3 times per week, and we self-monitor and we're exercising 3 times per week, then of course we have goal attainment. For the majority of people, particularly when they're looking at dietary behavior change or physical activity behavior change, it goes down the latter route. And that's where we see we're disruptant, that our behavior is not it's not congruent with our goal. And then we quit, or we change our behavior to reduce the discrepancy. And so those yellow pieces are just highlighting BCTs that, interestingly enough, if you use multiple behavior change techniques from control theory, it's been demonstrated that you'll have greater long-term effectiveness of behavior change. So those ones are ones, if you're going to try and change your dad's behavior like me, I would want to hit up those 3 yellows. Now, self-monitoring has come a really long way in a relatively short period of time. So back in the day, we would tell people if they wanted to self-monitor to log in a journal, essentially. Anyone ever heard of the Calorie King Bible? Double hands up. Okay, nobody. Awesome. It was like this thick, and people used to carry it on in their purses or what have you. So the early days of Weight Watchers, you would have your Bible, your Calorie King Bible, because to know what you were eating, you would have to flip through an awesome book like that. So, of course, we've moved on from that to things like pedometers, so wearable devices that we could then track. In the early days, you would have to look at that number and then write it down in your journal. But of course, with mHealth, we don't have to do that anymore. There's a few neat things that mHealth apps that help us self-monitor do. They prevent backlog, and so any scientist who's attempted to monitor the behavior of their participants for several months will tell you it's a pain in the butt when essentially people come in and the ink is still wet on their food recalls or their logbooks because they've forgotten until they come into your 12-month follow-up assessment time point or what have you. So with self-monitoring apps, of course, they can do it as soon as you ask them to in EMA, or as soon as they've engaged in the behavior. So, for example, have gone out for dinner. It also helps calculate things for us, so it's a massive time saving. So instead of calculating how many kcals or what have you you're tracking, it does it all for you. And then apps nowadays, of course, allow us to have that interactive capability. If that's AI informed or not, it's still interactive. So we can say, you know, you've now hit your sodium goal for the day. Here's some strategies, or here's some recipes for dinner that are low in sodium. So some data that we've collected to look at whether apps can help us self-monitor. We actually randomized people who had gym membership, so everyone was going to the gym already. But we wanted to see if providing those in the experimental condition with mHealth app that was theory-based could advance their self-monitoring practices. And you can see here in the dark blue that it did, pre-post 8-week intervention. And perhaps more interesting that self-monitoring was then associated with an increase in physical activity behavior in the experimental condition as assessed by gym swipes in that gym. So how did we do it? Really quickly, we gave them the app in the experimental condition. We told them about the importance of self-monitoring. We told them again about the importance of self-monitoring. We highlighted their past accomplishments, went through vicarious experiences. We talked about that feedback loop, and what I mean by that is that loop that I demonstrated in the control theory model there. So it can be done by apps. The good news, if you're interested or if you want to incorporate some of this stuff into your own interventions, is that they actually, I think it's 88% of apps have self-monitoring strategies built into them. So even if they haven't been tested by scientists like yourself, they will more than likely have that self-monitoring piece. Challenge is most apps don't have anything else but self-monitoring in them, but that's for another talk. Another way that we've used self-monitoring and assessed what it can do for people's behavior change is by the use of continuous glucose monitors. So this one here is inserted into your abdominal tissue and looking with a thin monitor assesses your blood glucose levels in your interstitial fluid. But now, finally, in Canada, we can get the Libre, which is on the backside of the triceps. And this old school one, it actually has a pager, essentially, this attractive piece that you would wear around your hips. And we use this device to attempt to increase self-monitoring behavior in individuals with prediabetes as well as type 2 diabetes. And so first, just showing you the self-monitoring for blood glucose. So the purple line is those who we stuck a continuous glucose monitor in 3 times throughout 2 months. And then we also assessed their follow-up, which was 1 month following the intervention. Really interesting, though, was that I'm so glad we measured it. We weren't anticipating any changes in self-monitoring of exercise behavior because we weren't targeting that at all, but it increased as well in that condition. So it's suggestive of transferable skills. What we, of course, assessed was what happened with their exercise behavior, if they increased their self-monitoring practices, and what we found was that, again, the purple line indicative of those who we gave the CGMs to, they attended more of the sessions for exercise that they were enrolled in. The standard care was also enrolled in the 8-week intervention. And so they attended more, but also really neat was that they signed up for more classes at the end of our intervention. So they signed up for the next 8-week class, whereas a lot less signed up for the exercise classes who are in the standard care. So what does this look like? Again, I'm all about takeaways, so if you're interested, briefly in the standard care condition, they were all to engage in the 8-week intervention of twice weekly exercise. After each exercise bout, we just gave them control content. And in the self-monitoring condition, we talked about why you should monitor your blood glucose and how to self-monitor and how to set goals and why that's important. And we gave them a little logbook. And then we followed them up for 1 month afterwards. Okay, so some key ones I'd like to highlight for physical activity specifically in terms of effective behavior change techniques are all about practice. So effectively changing physical activity, we need to encourage our participants or your dads or whomever you're working with to engage in behavioral practice. So do the thing you're trying to change and do it a lot. And we need to provide them instructions on how to do that thing they're trying to change. So this is for, I'll just clarify that this is for the initiation of changing physical activity behavior. Other reviews out there on maintenance of physical activity, there's a review by Howlett et al., I think in 2019, so it was I think fairly recently. They also demonstrated the action planning of that physical activity behavior is key in maintenance. And so if you recall in that control theory, that was in one of those yellow stars or asterisks was action planning. So they're all good, but these ones are really good for initiation of physical activity. So how we do it in my lab is practice, practice, practice. We exercise with our participants or our patients, and we exercise in the way they want to exercise. So in our case, we're working a lot with individuals who have low baseline physical activity levels, are expressing overweight and or obesity, and are at poor glucose control. And a lot of them don't intend to buy exercise equipment or buy a fitness membership and will never have the means to do so. So they want to engage in exercise out of doors, and so we go right on with them. We do this to practice the physical sensations with them, so we can, you know, when they say, my heart's beating out of my throat, or is it safe for my legs to feel like this because I think I'm going to fall because they're so shaky, we can talk them through what's normal, what's not normal, and you know, how they can modify that exercise behavior based on their sensations. Likewise, we do that for affective sensations. So if they're not enjoying something and want to enjoy it, we can provide modifications. But also, this really provides participants with a chance to have past performance accomplishments. So successful experiences where they can say, yeah, I did this right and I enjoyed it. And hey, if I did it once, I can do it again. Another somewhat easy one to do if we're trying to change people's behavior, particularly the diet side, is to try and target more than just diet. So again, from the systematic review, targeting both exercise behavior as well as another behavior like physical activity has been shown to lead to greater changes in dietary behavior than changing diet alone. And so I'm going to talk you through my baby project in my lab, which we've entitled Small Steps for Big Changes, and how we target both diet and physical activity. I'm, in the interest of time, just providing a quick snapshot. But we really weave it in on each and every day of counseling. And so, yes, every day we exercise with them to provide that sense of security, but also practicing. But we are also talking to them about things like self-monitoring, food labels, how to reduce sugar content, etc. And so through that intervention, we meet with them a total of 6 times, and we follow them up for 12 months after their 6 visits with us. And so we also use digital technologies. I wish I could say that that was like a special feature of my screen, that we have like this moving speed approach, but I think it's just the screen here. We use digital technologies to target both behaviors, both requiring self-monitoring and both requiring a lot of mental math. So we ensure that our app does all of it for them, or as much as it can for them, including incorporation of our wearable technology into the app so that they don't have to bother downloading or doing any of that. So another big component that I feel as though we sometimes forget about when we're trying to change lifestyle behaviors is that there is importance in the mode of delivery. So you can have the most fantastic intervention content, but it still won't be efficacious if you're hitting it in the wrong direction. So mode of delivery has been shown to be really important for long-term outcomes of diet and physical activity behaviors. So one of those modes of delivery is face-to-face or not. So interventions that have incorporated face-to-face delivery have shown to be more effective than interventions that don't include such face-to-face. And I want to state here that I absolutely recognize and value that the desire and the attraction to mHealth technologies to deliver intervention material has its place. It increases reach, potentially, and it certainly reduces the cost to the caregiver, to the recipient. But I do think we need to keep that mode of delivery in mind, and the science out there demonstrating that there may be value in having some face-to-face delivery. And in the Small Steps for Big Changes, that's what we do. We do provide face-to-face, but we also provide app support to the individuals so we can intervene and interact with them from a distance. So another mode of delivery that we utilize in Small Steps for Big Changes incorporates lessons learned from motivational interviewing, which is really just a means of delivering content in your intervention that is autonomy supportive. So you do not need to be an expert in motivational interviewing or MI to practice some of the components, those really basic strategies that have been shown to be efficacious, particularly in lifestyle behaviors. So a lot on smoking cessation, but also a sizable amount of literature coming from MI on diet change and physical activity change. And so what we do in Small Steps is support the choice of the individual, and for all of us to just have a good healthy dose reminder that in order to be autonomy supportive, we need to listen. We need to listen to our clients, to our dads, to whomever is in front of us, and do a little bit less testing and a lot more listening, and then we modify the behaviors accordingly. So the real difference between MI and other types of counseling is that respect for that person in front of you, knowing that they know their bodies better than you ever will, and that they have experience that will help guide them through their process of change. And again, because I love takeaways and I love tangible pieces of advice that hopefully you can implement tomorrow if you wanted, was a strategy called ask, tell, ask, or elicit, provide, elicit. So if we are working with a client in front of us, we start by asking that client what really is important for them today to discuss. We know we have an agenda of diet and physical activity, but we've also come to respect that if we don't come to a place of asking them what they want, we're never getting anywhere. Instead, we're going to push and we're going to should them, and the more we push, the more they pull away. So it's actually really time-efficient savings to ask first. Then we want to ask permission to tailor our conversation from there. So is it okay if I provide you with some information about low sugar, high sugar foods? You mentioned that you're interested in that and changing that first. Then when we do provide those, when we do receive permission or consent from whoever is in front of us, that's when we tell. We can tell here what we know, respecting again that what we know might not be what they need to know. So we do that in giving options. So the general rule of thumb is to provide at least 3 options. So some of my past clients have found that X, Y, and Z works for them. And then we follow that tell with an ask or an elicit. We ask them to summarize what we just said. So just to make sure that I'm clear, would you mind reiterating back to me what I've just said? I want to make sure that I was able to converse appropriately. And then we ask for their thoughts on the options that we've provided. Do you think any of those would work for you? Or is it stimulated? Any ideas that you think would be even more related to your challenges and barriers? And so to do that in a tangible way, in a feasible way as well, we train all counselors in Small Steps for Big Changes through a 2-day Train the Trainer workshop. And the goal here, and we have some graduate students within my lab that are focusing just on the efficacy of that training modules, et cetera. But I want to just point out here that the onus isn't just on the research team. We can place some of that on our participants. And so we really ask them to highlight what is of value to you. Remember why you signed up for this program. And so it doesn't have to feel so onerous, I suppose, to take an MI approach. So we give, handouts like this to our participants. So in terms of, is this actually feasible? When we train our counselors in a 2-day workshop, this data is just a snapshot of some of the trainers we've gone through the program right now, and each color represents a different counselor or trainer. And after the 2-day workshop, they sustain their level of MI client-centered counseling skills for 6 months up to after that 2-day workshop. So the data is still coming as we progress each and every month, but so far, so good. So I'm not going to bore you with the outputs of Small Steps for Big Changes. I'm happy to share those references we've published thus far. But just a summary to say that we've had a lot of people go through the program. We're almost at 250 so far with 15 counselors trained. And we're seeing that there is weight loss, there is reduction in blood pressure, and sustainment of their increased physical activity levels. What I'm more proud of is that they sustain these changes at the 12-month time point. Stay tuned on our A1C results because they come in from the lab each and every month, and there wasn't enough data that I felt comfortable would represent the mean, so just waiting for a few more months to come by on that. So the numbers are great, the stories are better.
I actually heard Dr. Jung talking on CBC radio. It was sort of the day after I'd had a bit of an incident in my life where I thought maybe I might even have had a heart attack. And when I heard Dr. Jung on CBC the next morning, I thought, this sounds like I'm exactly the person they're looking for. My health at that time was probably 70 or 80 pounds overweight, completely sedentary. I did almost no exercise at all. I was on medication for acid reflux. I was on a CPAP machine, which helped me breathe properly when I slept. I suspect that my boys were a little bit worried about me. They were sort of watching a path that I was going down. I was getting a little bit older. My physical condition was getting worse and worse as time went on. And I knew, and I think they knew, that it was sort of a now or never thing, that in 10 years I wasn't going to be able to do what I wanted to do now. I think the wow moment for me from a physical standpoint was comments that I'd received from family members. I have 3 boys and 2 of them live a long ways away. And one of them met me at an airport one time as I was traveling for work. We just happened to cross paths. And his reaction is what really solidified to me that it was working. He looked at me and he hadn't seen me for 6 or 8 months, and he thought, wow, I'm seeing a profound change. The program not only helped me get in better physical shape as far as my cardiovascular, but it helped me lose weight as well. So I lost a total of 70 pounds during the program. I'm no longer on a CPAP machine. I don't need it to sleep anymore. I'm no longer on medication for any problems I have with my stomach. I've got a mountain bike now I ride. I walk on a regular basis. I recently just acquired a paddleboard. So I'm exploring things that I never would have explored before. And now when people say, hey, we're going to volleyball, we're going to do this, I don't hesitate to try to get involved now, because I know for the most part I'm going to be able to keep up with everybody.
All right. Double hands up for Don, because he's amazing. Excellent. All right. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So, takeaways. VCTs are the effective behavior techniques that I think everyone can incorporate, regardless if you're intervening one-on-one with participants or if you're running a 12-week intervention on whatever it is you're running. Encourage self-monitoring, and you can do that through evidence-based apps. Most apps do incorporate self-monitoring, so it doesn't technically need to be tested by scientists to incorporate that. And encourage practice. If you're trying to get people to exercise, encourage them to practice exercising. I think we can all incorporate MI in our interventions by listening a lot more and talking a lot less. And when we're utilizing mHealth technologies, enforcing self-monitoring skills, we can also enforce instructions in there as well, and encouragement to practice. And again, keeping note of those successes will help with that overarching feedback loop of self-monitoring. Finally, I didn't touch on it because there's not enough time in here, but context always matters. So this is specific primarily to diabetes prevention, but really understanding your participants and their barriers is of utmost importance and always the first step in engaging. So with that, I'd just like to acknowledge my lab, Diabetes Prevention Research Group, and my major funders. Thank you.